Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the next episode of 401 Access Denied. Really excited to be here for another educational, fun topic to bring as much education and knowledge and value to you so you can really kind of get your security best practices and strategies and incident response and everything kind of, going and planned and practiced. So hopefully this will be a very valuable session for you today. My name is Joseph Carson. I'm one of your co-hosts of the show. Chief Security Scientist at Thycotic and based in Tallinn, Estonia. So I'm really excited to be here for this next episode. So passing it over to Mike to give us an update and what we're in for today. And he was our special guest.
Yep. Mike Groen, VP of Engineering and CISO here at Cybrary. Really excited to talk to DJ Fuller from Pathfynder about what it's like to work with a security service provider and what all the different services are, incident response. And I'll throw it over to DJ to introduce himself. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here. DJ Fuller, CEO of Pathfynder. We're a Bozeman, Montana-based cybersecurity company. Really focus heavily on technical cyber services. We have office in Washington, D.C. as well. Help companies in a variety of ways, which we can go into. Really, more than anything, incredible team that we have. A lot of former DoD, intelligence community, cyber practitioners. Those are the ones that do the real work every day and really bring that knowledge to our clients. So happy to be here.
Thanks for joining us.
Yep, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. One question I've got for you is really, it's something that's, for a long time that organizations, they struggle to get the in-house expertise, and they don't necessarily need to have the expertise. And it's really important for them to go out and actually get retainers and get services from those, because it's not like organizations, you're not dealing with incidents, you're not dealing with security events every single day. So if you're not doing it every single day, what happens is your skill sets can become a bit, let's say, not up to speed and a bit maybe kind of not on par with those who are dealing with it every day. How important is it for organizations to actually sign up and make sure they actually get services from expertise, whether being into penetration testing or red teaming or incident response? How important is it for them to actually sign up and gain access to those services, especially when they need them?
Based on the landscape that we're seeing right now, obviously it's extremely important. I think one of the things that we hear from some folks and some clients sometimes who end up becoming clients is, well, my business isn't, that important. It's not that sexy. We're not doing anything that someone would want to attack us. And really, like, no one's safe today. If you look at what I would call like the cyber powder keg forming, in the cyber environment, the attack surfaces are just growing larger and larger as companies are scaling. Cyber adversaries are getting more innovative. And I think that's creating this unique scenario where attackers are increasingly motivated, and really they just have this lush landscape to go and attack. And so I think, what companies have to understand right now is that being on the defensive really means that the adversary is going to set the tempo, time, and place of the attack. So if you really have no control or very little control on when the attack's going to happen, and to your point, like, you need to have thought about some of these services well prior to needing them. And I think what we're seeing as far as how clients are treating it, a few years ago, it would have been someone would do a pen test and a vulnerability scan because their legal agreement said it. And it was a check in the box for some compliance. Maybe it was SOC 2, PCI. But now we're actually seeing clients start to get ahead of it in their budgets, engage, and say, how do we have a continuous program throughout the year that is right size for our organization? So it could be a pen test, it could be a red team, it could be multiple of those things, but it could be also a lot of just basics that they need to train their employees on. Mm-hmm. So we're starting to see this shift from people saying, well, I'll just buy more insurance and, we'll have to do one thing a year to check a box, to how do I really start to defend myself and how do I create the right budget to do that?
Can we just take a step back? Because I think, and DJ, you and I have talked about this in the past, that just organizations, I think, come to you and don't even necessarily know, like, what's the difference between a pen test and a red team, and what are these different things? I think just sort of defining some of that stuff for the audience would be super helpful.
Absolutely. So one of the areas we focus is on the offensive side, which are some of the services that you mentioned. oftentimes called the red side of cyber. So a couple different things to lay out. Usually, what people are getting when they think they're getting a pen test is a vulnerability scan. And there's multiple, and these are automated tools. There's different scanners. There's some that are more prevalent in the industry, but a lot of times what will happen is someone will call that a pen test. They'll run an automated scan, which kicks out the results. They'll put some executive summary on it, and they'll present it to the client, for something like $5,000, and say they did their pen test. And that's pretty far from a pen test. When you actually talk about penetration testing, whether it be a web app or physical infrastructure or any other applications that you have, you're actually talking about someone with an ethical hacking background that maybe uses multiple scanners to just understand where the gaps are in the network, but then is actually going in and doing manual testing to figure out how they would simulate an attacker getting in to the environment, and really spending tens of hours. If you're buying a pen test and someone's spending less than 40 hours actually trying to find all the attack vectors in, I'm not going to say you're wasting your money, because every size company has different needs, but that's kind of what a real pen test is. So sometimes we hear clients say, well, we were quoted this for a pen test, and we're like, well, you're not getting a pen test. So it's important. And then a red team can mean a lot of things depending on if you want to bring physical into it. But the way that we oftentimes approach a red team, think of a normal penetration test as from the outside, like there's a wall in the company, and it's really the external, looking at it from an external lens. When you talk about red teaming, it goes to what would be called an internal pen test. And so the idea is that an attacker is in your environment. There's a couple ways to do that. There's different models to gain access. We prefer the assume breach model. So you'll hear different things. Like some people say, here's a contractor laptop. We want you to get into our environment starting with just a basic user. But we use an assume breach model, which usually means someone was phished to the point where they clicked on an executable, which we all know, given enough time, we can do that. So you save the client money by not spending hours phishing folks. And then the goal is to enter in with the lowest level access possible in a red team, and prove that you can move laterally and then vertically through their system to eventually get to their crown jewels. And why is this important? Because that's what we hear in the world of ransom these days. So what are attackers ransoming? Well, they're usually ransoming the crown jewels to be able to say, pay me or your business is over. So that's essentially a red team, is an internal pen test. We're seeing a lot more companies do that. We're seeing automation start to play into the red team side of the house. Some different opinions on that in the industry. I still think the manual touch is extremely important. The AI doesn't exist that can move and find all the holes laterally. So that's kind of what folks and clients should think about when they're setting kind of their offensive budget.
I would think on the automation side, I mean, it's like anything automated, right? If you can use some automated tools to sort of save some money and save some steps, right, you still need the manual, but like, hey, now we can just do that much more on the same size budget because we do sort of a manual internal scan. We do these scans. I mean, it's the same reason why the scans and other things exist. In talking to other companies, I know like one of the big questions or the conversation points with prospects or clients or whatever, and the service provider is like, how much information to give to this company you're hiring, right? And it's like, and I know my friends that work at them, they're like, the more information you give us, the better off, because we can spend hours and hours and hours spending your money digging up this information, or you can just give it to us because an attacker has unlimited time. They'll eventually get the same information. So you might as well just sort of give it to us up front rather than trying to simulate a total outside person.
Yeah, focus on what your goals are.
Right.
What is the success that you measure success, and try to minimize the waste where possible. It's ultimately what you want to achieve.
Without a doubt. And we see it very, it's different client by client. Some just don't have the budget. And so in that case, it's what are the goals? What are the crown jewels? What's the information that we need to show you where your weaknesses are so you can defend against them as quick as possible? However, there's some folks, like some of the very large institutions that are worried about a lot of different things that'll say, here's 1,000 hours, like go and
Right.
tell us what we don't know. We tend to like to start with very little knowledge. We just say, give us an internal user, give us, remote access via VPN, and then we'll tell you when it's better for you to give us something where you're going to spend too much money. For example, we had a client recently where we got to a point where we proved that we could download a pretty large file that would then give us access to more users to then get to their crown jewels. And we said, instead of us spending 5 hours downloading this file, we can do it. Just go ahead and give us the next the next level of access, because you're saving money. Now we can
You're
saving time. So I think it depends, and you're exactly right on the tools. We use some of the tools. Anything that can help us save time so that we can do more manual work for the client is really the goal. And I think that's how it has to be looked at.
So question, I've done quite a few penetration tests in the past and participated in red teaming as well. And one of my main goals is always to stay as stealthy as possible. Raise no alarms, create no flags, which means that introducing as very little tools as possible. So what I tend to do is living off the land. I look at what tools are available already to me, whether they're using something like a SIEM that you can gain access to, or you're looking at maybe System Center or some type of automation. Are they using PowerShell automatically? Are they using things like PS Exact that you can just hide, within the shadows and darkness there, that you can make it look like it's normal IT operations? Where do you sit in between, introducing new automation tools? What I tend to do is I try to take things out and do the automation in my own place versus bringing the tools into their environment where it can create much more noise. What's your kind of approach on that?
Yeah, we approach it the exact same way that you just said. We'd rather bring it out of the environment. And I think one of the things that we're sorry to pivot a bit, but one of the you made me think of something. One of the things that we're actually seeing is that companies are increasingly buying more purple teams these days.
Mm-hmm. I've seen that as well.
And I think it's because they recognize that you could pay for a red team. In 2 weeks, someone's going to come back and tell you where you need to increase your visibility, defend. But what a better opportunity to sit side by side with the blue team and say, we just did this. Did you see this? Do you have visibility that let you know that we just downloaded a 7 gig? Okay, you don't. Why is that important? Because the constant struggle in the industry is like blue and red trying to work happily together.
I think that is the most critical thing. We need them to work together. That's why purple teaming is so important, because we need to. One is otherwise we're just going to basically do retrospectives. We're going to do lessons learned, but we're actually not going to do anything to stop it. And that's the whole purpose of purple teaming, is to make sure that the defenders know the techniques that's used, so they can actually put the goal. My goal, I always have a methodology that I take, which is the more noise I can force the attacker to take, the more risks, the more noise that they make throughout the environment, the more better chance I have at detecting them. And that's what you want to force them to do. You want to force them to be noisy, because my goal, when I look at my methodology, it's be as stealthy as possible, is to introduce very little, use resources efficiently, doing it as the quickest time I possibly can, with the least amount of money. So stealthy is the most important. If I can't be stealthy, then that's where I start to increase everything else. So the more risk we force them to take, the more noise they'll create. And ultimately, if they start creating noise and you force them to take that risk, you have a better chance to detect them much earlier. And that's where my thoughts is around purple teaming, is that's their goal, is to force more noise in the environment so they can actually detect them much quicker and put the right controls in place that will actually make it more challenging, more difficult. So that's kind of my methodology and approach I've always taken. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very similar to how I got into like cybersecurity in the first place. I was as an application developer. I think I've told this story before. I was like responsible for being the liaison with the team that we'd hired to do an actual like pen test, and I watching them use their tools and their techniques, and they were happy to share it with me because they're like, the more you understand, the next time we come through, this stuff will all be buttoned up, and we can focus on the next level of it, like the next like higher thing. So I think that's also an important part is like that budget, that the money spent, right? Like, great, you got this report back, but what good is that going to do you if the next time you go through this process, you're just going to get basically the same findings? Like, you need that educational piece. You need the blue team. You need the application developers. You need everybody to understand the abstract concepts that these attackers are using so that they can use their brains to better defend as well.
One of the, we evolved a bit this year with our red teaming and purple teaming because, and we could kind of talk about what we're seeing in the different size clients just in general. But, we have a lot of clients that probably could pay for a full red team, but it's not worth their money yet. You like within 2 hours, we'll have your box, it'll be over. And then you spend a lot of money and it's not worth it. So we kind of were challenged to come up with a new way, a new product, if you will, where we're trying to use it more as a training tool. And so we're going in and we're spending, we do it every other month, and we go in and we build a different, I wouldn't call it completely automated, but we do almost this unit level red teaming or purple teaming where we have a specific goal of training at the end of it. So we'll start out, and typically an attacker will go in, as you know, and they'll execute a TTP. They'll leverage that TTP to find something to move laterally. So what we're trying to do inside of some of these companies that are trying to become more sophisticated is we don't move laterally. We'll execute the TTP. We'll prove out that case. So, we just proved why it's important to have segmentation. We'll stop there. We'll have a conversation with the client. Go build segmentation, right? And then the next, 2 months later, we'll execute another TTP. And the idea is that at the end of 12 months, you've essentially helped them mature to a point where in the next year, they may have the capability to really test that and do a full red or purple team. So it's kind of a little bit of unit level testing combined with training and helping them become better, because a lot of clients are just figuring out where to start right now.
Absolutely. Get the basics done, because ultimately, if you don't have the basics done, you're going to be wide open to attacks. And I think that's great. I really like that approach, that you're really going through and focusing on specific details, making sure that we find this one, let's make sure we actually close it immediately, and then basically then to go to the next one. So really much more of a maturity type model than just a quick checkbox, spray and pray type of approach that we hope we find everything, close everything up. That this is much more pragmatic, much more, let's say, strategic into making sure that something like, I guess, organizations this year, where they've opened up RDP. Let's just take RDP as a specific, type of attack, and make sure that basically, we detect all the weaknesses and all the risks that organizations taken, and let's close that. Let's just focus on the one, specific attack vector, and then we move to the next one and the next one, and I think it's much more, let's say, it allows more maturity and more, quicker educational learning. Taking the most critical assets, I would tend to do first, and kind of layer it down following that. I like that approach. It's good.
There's probably a lot of people listening thinking, well, I don't really know if I have anything to penetration test, or if I have, anything to red team. So it's probably not applicable. But, on the maturity curve or the sophistication curve, I don't know what you're seeing, but we find that it's hard in this industry to segment necessarily by revenue or employee size. It's usually by the amount of effort that they put into cybersecurity, the sophistication level. And so for some of our clients, I would say I wouldn't call them the lower end of the sophistication, but maybe they're a professional services company that, they're like, well, we have O365, we use SharePoint, we talk to our customers on Teams, and we send a couple emails. And in those cases, I think folks really these days, if you want to talk about incident response, have to start looking at BEC, business email compromise. And it's not even what it was a year ago. It used to be phishing, buy one, get one free from this store, click on it. It's becoming extremely targeted. Attackers are getting into these, O365 or Google Workspace environments, and they're hanging out there. And they're usually hanging out somewhere where invoices fly back and forth. And they're winning. So for those types of people, we oftentimes say, very basically, you need to worry about your cloud applications like Google Workspace, O365. There's very basic security audits that you can do, because a lot of times those products come out of the box built for productivity, but not for security. Doesn't mean that security isn't available, just means it's not automatically enabled the right way coming out of the box. So, a lot of times we go in, we'll do like a 12-point audit of both of those systems, depending on the one that they have. We'll come back with recommendations on security controls that they should enable. And then we can do those for them so that they have the right multi-factor authentication rules set up. They have the right logging set up. I mean, you can't do a whole lot from a threat hunting or an IR perspective if you don't have logs enabled.
Oh, that's my worst nightmare. Every time I get in, I mean, I have a system back there I've been doing forensics on, a ransomware case, and the attackers basically come in, deleted application, system, security logs, VPN logs, PowerShell logs, and I'm going. And there's no archive, there's no backups, there's nothing. So what you're trying to do is just recover from everything else around it that may have touched, that might give you some visibility using things like Plaso or other types of, correlation tools. It will give you some type of timeline, and then you're trying to fill in the gaps. And it's getting to the point where, if you don't have logs, or if you have logs only in certain areas, it only gives you this tiny little view, and it means that it means that you have to use your experience. You have to use your knowledge into, here's what I've seen in a similar environment that I can make assumptions and kind of fill in the gaps. But that's my worst case, is when I go into an organization and I'm dealing with an incident response and I have no logs to deal with. What you're doing is,
and I think that brings up there's having logs, but then also having backups of the logs and offsite back, like all the rest of it. And I think that leads into another thing that we were talking about, which is like, what are some of the common mistakes? Right. There's going to be an incident, there's going to be something. So when that happens, like, what are you seeing, DJs? Like, what do you think are like some pretty common mistakes people make? What should you do? What should you not do?
And I'd love your opinion as well, Joe. But I think some of the common mistakes that we see, and this a lot of times applies to folks that haven't invested in an incident response retainer, planning, tabletop. They're just not prepared. First off, number one, the communications plan completely breaks down from the start. The wrong information gets out. Information gets out that shouldn't. Communication isn't right to the board, whatever it may be. So I think that's number one. I think you just hit on it, Joe. You did as well, Mike. Mishandling of evidence. I think a lot of folks say we're doing the right thing by shutting this down or making a quick backup, but they're oftentimes inadvertently destroying volatile data. So the important point is that you have someone that knows how to come in and preserve the data right away. I think number three, and we touched on it with the O365 and Google Workspace security settings, is misconfigured applications for security. So, the big challenge that we're facing, everything's moving to the cloud. So how do you do incident response in the cloud? And I think logs is a big one, but if you're using all these systems, the important piece is that you have set up the right user level access and enabled that user, whether it be an admin or someone else, with all of the right security settings. Because the time to say, how do we go in and create an admin user and see if we even have logs for the system isn't when the attack's happening. And another thing for folks to know is that time, when it comes to some of those cloud environments, time is important, because they'll say, okay, well, I'll try to get the access. I'll talk to this. We're triaging all these things. Some systems are set up so that it only keeps 7 days. So it's going to overwrite itself. And you may have to Joe's point, you have no information on the attacker that you would have had you had that incident response plan in place. And I think you mentioned it earlier, and I'd say the fourth thing from a mistake standpoint is not giving a previous red flag, maybe the due diligence it deserves, like underestimating it. Something weird happened. You thought one account was compromised and you said, well, we just had them change their password. They should be good. It's unfortunate that we live in this world, but you really have to follow those types of things up with a threat hunt or something else to ensure that that wasn't the breach. And now someone's hanging out for a month. There's been countless cases of very large reportable incidences where it's been traced back that it happened a year prior. And they've just been, so I think focusing on those types of things, but more than anything, have an incident response plan and practice it. And a lot of those things are mitigated.
So, I mean, we talked to a cyber insurance company that not that long ago. Their recommendation was like, the first thing you should do is call us. And then, I feel like maybe not. Is that the first call, or or should I call my service? I think it's important to make sure that my insurance provider and my service, the company that's actually going to be providing the service, have a relationship so that I'm not like bringing in the wrong. So my cyber insurance company isn't like, oh, you brought in somebody we don't work with.
I have an opinion on that, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's one of the ones that you have. That's one of those contexts that you have to inform. And unless, if you might be a small business, you might not have a retainer ready with an incident response team or somebody who's done digital forensics. So your insurance company might have those resources. If they're providing a full 360 service, they might come in with legal counsel. They might come in with PR readiness. They might come in with specific expertise that you can leverage. So it really comes down to what relationship you have and what type of insurance that you have. That might be the first, if they're providing a full 360 service. If there's just insurance, you probably want to have other services available ready. You want to have a PR, you want to have legal, you want to have a financial person who can give you, understanding about impact analysis. You want to have incident responders who can come in and do evidence gathering. So it really comes down, but you should have something. You shouldn't not be doing this, like looking in the yellow pages or the book to try and find out.
You're saying my first move shouldn't be DuckDuckGo response.
It should not be your first search.
The interesting thing is, you're right. The full 360 services, they have it all for you right there. But the majority of the time, this is what we see happening, is because someone hasn't bought a huge incident response retainer with a company, they're not going to get priority handling. So something weird's going to happen. And let's say that we'll give a couple scenarios. Let's say they do have an incident response provider and they don't. They're like, wait a second, we have incident response insurance, right? And, cyber insurance, go dig that policy out. You dig the policy out, there's a 1-800 number. Okay, call that number. And it's patching through to the law firm that has been outsourced to determine if there's been an incident. Someone's going to answer the phone. You're going to tell them what you think happened. They're going to collect a bunch of info. The clock starts, right? The billable hour starts. And in some amount of time, they get back to you to let you know if you have a payable incident. In the meantime, you're like, we're losing business. Like everyone's scared. We don't know what's happening. Yes. So then they're going to come back, call it 48 hours or later and say, okay, this is something that we're going to pay for. Here's a list of firms that we work with. Pick one of them. You're going to call those. You're going to start down the list, right? And they're going to say, we can get to you in a couple weeks. Like, we're super busy right now. And oh, by the way, it's going to be very expensive. And now you're kind of dead in the water for a period of time. So that's kind of what we're seeing from the folks who maybe don't have a plan. For the folks that do, the way that we pitch our retainer is we do not go into it with a ton of hours, because we understand that this isn't a huge focus for the medium-sized businesses. But typically we go in and we say, okay, for this incident response retainer, half of the hours are going to be used by us to help you get to a point administratively where you should be. IR planning is an example. We'll build your IR plan for you. We'll rehearse your IR plan with you, i.e. tabletop exercise. We'll train your employees. We'll do all the stuff so that when it happens, because it will happen, you've at least gone through it once, and that will make you 80% better. And then the other half of the incident response retainer has to be kept in reserve for when the phone call comes. And so take the same example. Call the 1-800 number. They're putting you in the holding pattern, right? And you're waiting. In the meantime, we are on site virtually within 6 hours, and we're spending, let's say, 40 hours in your environment to at least do a couple things. One, we're helping you understand what happened. We're preserving the data. We're starting to do the forensics. So then at this point, the law firm comes back and they say, you have an incident. It'll be paid for. Use one of these 20 firms. You say, well, I'm using this firm. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes, if they, look at a firm like ours or someone, they'll say, okay, like they know what they're doing. You can use them. Even if they say you can't, we've spent, let's say, 40 hours in your environment, and we're handing over a ton of information to the firm that you're forced to use, where you haven't lost time, money, saving you money. I mean, it's just,
you've prevented it from escalating as well, from getting worse. Yeah, prevented. So I completely agree, because it reminds me, I remember going back a couple of years to NotPetya situation. Mm-hmm. And here in Europe, of course, you had one of the large companies, Merck, who became a significant victim of that. Right. And they hired up all the consultants to do recovery. So literally, any other company who became victim, there was no one available. There was no consultants, no services. And if you were lucky to get, you're going to pay, probably double what you would have paid if it was basically, a single incident. So those are the situations. And to your point as well, I think it's really important to have a relationship and have some understanding, because coming in blind to an environment and not having an understanding of what the business is, where the assets are, what the naming conventions are, what processes they have in place, makes your job much more difficult. And you'll probably waste several hours just trying to get some knowledge about what is the landscape, what am I dealing with here. Where if you've had previous relationship you've been in, you understand their business, you understand who the people are, the contacts, the skill sets they have, it makes things go much more smoother. The communication is more fluid. You can respond quicker, and you don't waste that time trying to just get an idea of the environment. You have some understanding because you've been basically partnering with them along that experience. So it means you're absolutely at a point where you can really respond much faster, much more efficiently, and quickly move through the steps to where you're already getting past the eradication phase, you've got a containment phase, and you start building, hopefully within 24 hours, you're already building a recovery plan. If you're not in a recovery plan in 24 hours, you're starting to really impact revenue, business, and everything else that comes out, out of, the longer that you're down. So I think that's really important for organizations to consider. And that's why having a retainer, having an organization on hand with the number that you're paying for, that basically when you call, that you'll have somebody respond within the hour, that you'll have basically somebody available as quickly as possible, rather than waiting, that, you get to an organization who's busy because the insurance company might be actually dealing with multiple instances at the same time, just because maybe they're a national or state level or global provider, that makes them much more limited resources. So I think it's really important. I think organizations do definitely need to have expertise available, especially when they need them, because for things like ransomware cases, time is the most critical thing that you have. If you don't respond as quickly as possible, then you're going to start actually having more systems getting infected, more data becoming unavailable. The ransom demand will just get bigger, because ransom demands are related to how many systems are actually, what size is your database? How many systems are impacted? That's the questions they'll have. And that's where they'll go the little calculator and determine how much Bitcoins you need to pay. And the more that you can prevent that, the quicker you can sever that active attack, the more you're saving the company. And I think that's what's important.
It's not that expensive to have the retainer that we sell. Obviously, if someone wants to buy a ton of hours, like, we'll sell it to them, but the retainer we sell is not that expensive. And what you're getting for it, actually building your plan and testing it. I mean, if you read various reports out there, some of the industry juggernauts, you'll typically find that the 2 or 3 biggest mitigating factors to reducing cost in a cyber attack are related to having an incident response plan and testing it. And for a lot of companies, that can translate into $1 million and $1.5 million easily. To your point, just time is important. So It's so important these days to have it. And most folks within their organization, especially small to medium sized, they absolutely don't have the forensics capability in house.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, I think that's another, even the bigger organizations, right? I feel like there's no way you can have the staff on staff unless you're dealing with an attack every day. Like, you can't justify the cost of having these people, and if they do have that expertise, but they're not exercising it every day because they have some other job, which is their main job, then when something happens, they're going to be behind. They're going to be, knocking off the rust or doing and getting up to speed. And I think it's, similar to like any number of other things where sometimes you just need that ability to flex up because something has happened and I just need to reach out and get the right people with the right expertise. I think I equated it to
earlier,
fighting fires.
So you don't want a doctor sitting in your house,
right, exactly.
When you need to.
So. Right. But you always have a plan. And like, I don't know, like take a school, for example. They have a plan in the event of a fire. They have fire systems in place. They know what to do. They practice it all the time. And the fire department also shows up. Like, they don't just depend on their internal resources to fight that fire or having gone through this plan or having a fire marshal or whatever. There's all of these things that go into that. And so, making sure that you know who to call in the event of an emergency.
The funny part is
an important part.
That same school's probably it's probably a higher probability they're going to hit with a cyber attack than a fire.
Absolutely.
These days it's probably higher. Yeah, the likeliness has changed significantly. So, absolutely. But I think, Mike, to your point, I agree that the organization, what they need to have internally is a coordinator, somebody who is familiar with the process, somebody who can manage and project, and plan and make sure that things are running smoothly according to what they've already pre-tested. So they do need to have some type of coordinator internally. But I think their job is just more for the relationship to make sure that the right people are informed. So they might be informing the executive team to what's happening. So I don't believe they need to have permanent incident response in-house, but they need somebody who's familiar, somebody who, like in schools or offices, they will have some type of safety officer who's familiar where things are, where that red button is, or how to make the alarm, or when to contact the incident response team. I think they need to have somebody who's ready for that, but
a school nurse,
somebody who's in good awareness,
right?
Somebody who knows when they can look at something and say, this is something bad, we should deal with it, we should hit the emergency button and
well, yeah, I think that's another and I think DJ touched on it earlier, is that notion of like being able to recognize, like, oh, wait a second, this is just a tip of an iceberg, this is a flag, this isn't like somebody's password, like whatever, we'll change it and move on. Like, right, someone who can recognize and throw a flag on the plane, be like, no, this is potentially an indicator of a much larger problem, let's go ahead and sort of look into that.
So DJ, question to you, and this, when you get called in and you respond to an incident and you're not dealing with it and you start gathering, and you're looking through you have logs and you're gathering through and you're getting visibility. What's really, for me, what gets really frustrating is that in many cases, the attackers were not silent. There's so much noise in the logs that, servers rebooting, and all of a sudden you're like, well, has anyone looked at the logs of why that server was rebooting? And it was because basically they were actually running scans and downloading as a staging machine, or it was patient zero, that there was so much noise in logs that they were overlooked. They just thought, it's nothing, it happens.
Well, it's a self-healing system. Obviously it detected a problem and just rebooted itself.
I mean, we see it even a little bit more, a lot of times we'll get a phone call for just basic business email compromise. And it could be, I almost wired the money. I did wire the money. Because the attackers are getting good. I mean, they're the ones that we're seeing lately they're sitting there, they're intercepting invoices. They're making, PDF editing them with software these days. They're changing an account number, and people are doing it. So a lot of times when we first come in, and it's like, well, have you seen an increase in weird phishing emails or people asking you like weird emails from internally? And they'll say, yeah, we have. And it's like, that's not even in the logs, right? That's just right in front of your face every day. So it's it's so important to, and I mean, we tell our clients that they can use their incident response retainer for threat hunting after maybe a BEC attack. We don't really care. We just want them to be safe.
Yeah. Because your point, that could be somebody, because I always think it's important to make sure you even the smallest things could be the indicator of a massive attack
Right.
that's kind of forthcoming. And sometimes, there's also misdirection as well. You'll find that if you're getting somebody poking a hole or doing some type of phishing or information gathering in order to get details, it might be because they're actually planning something bigger to go through another door that you're not basically observing. So I think it's really important that if you do have, and I will say one of my favorite things is to try and be unpredictable as well. If the more unpredictable you are, and the more random things you could do from a security perspective, is you can bring that noise and bring that visibility to the surface. And threat hunting is something that shouldn't be planned. It should be basically done ad hoc. When you need to, when you just think you've got a gut feeling sometimes that we need to just go and take a look. Let's do it now. Let's basically let's not spend 6 months talking about it. Let's just do it and let's see what we find. That randomization misdirection can sometimes really bring a lot of things to the surface that you wouldn't typically get just from normal day-to-day operations.
My biggest piece of advice I can give is multi-factor authentication. Like we tell some folks, you could tell you're talking on the phone with some of the clients, and I'm like, here's a free one, MFA. We won't even charge you for that. It's like we tell them, if you don't have, and I know it's hard for some folks that don't want to accept tech. It's not fun that every time your IP address changes or you're on a new Wi-Fi network, you're going to get MFA'd from your phone, 4 places on your Mac, but it's like driving down the street in your car without a seatbelt on. Like
for me, the more frustrating thing is all of the services that we use that either don't support MFA or don't support SSO so that we can have it go back to the system that we use MFA. We have MFA set up, and yet there's these systems that we're sort of forced to use because for business reasons we've chosen this is the best provider of the service. Their security is subpar in some way, and that's for me one of the more frustrating parts is well, that's great. We have, we've configured this, and it's going to use SSO and it's going to enforce MFA because our SSO, what we're using for SSO uses MFA, and this is going to be great. And then it turns out there's no way to turn off the username and password authentication. There's all our end users still can use username and password rather than using the SSO. There's no way to just restrict it to SSO.
And Mike,
things like that are frustrating.
Yeah, absolutely. In that case, one of the things is that you either have 2 decisions. You either go with either a privileged access solution and actually filter everything through that way. So then before you even get onto that system, you're managing the security controls beforehand. Or the second point is that, then that has to be on a segregated part of the system. You can't integrate it because that ends up being basically a pivot or lateral move if you use the same credentials. So you have to make a choice. You have to decide that you're going to accept the risk that you're exposing, or you'll take additional security controls to make sure that you're actually minimizing that risk. And that's always, it comes on, it's a business decision, but they have to understand, we have to be the translators to the business to help them say, if you do this and you continue, having a system that is basically using weak credentials, no additional security controls, and we're using our same Active Directory account to access the system as other systems, then we're going to have basically, we're a security incident waiting to happen. So we better go and have our incident response team on hand, and we better have it in place because we're going to need to use it. So you have to create that balance, and you have to create that expectation. So I think that's really important, especially when you're looking at those legacy systems.
Yeah, it's a lot of it's not even legacy systems. It's these new SaaS systems that are online. We're taking actually a lot of active steps to change things around on how some of those work, and then also access, provision, just the level of access. They just don't have the roles with fine-grained enough controls. It's sort of well, I need this person to be able to do X, but in order, but it turns out only admins can do that. It's I don't want to give.
And
this person.
That's what privileged access.
That's another frustrating. Yeah,
that's what privileged access allows you to do. Is say, this button here. Was it? I'll give them. I don't need to give them admin access, but this button, when they push it, I'll actually elevate it on demand in the background, so they don't have to have They don't have to have
Right.
that full role and scope. You'll deal with those elevations when they need to. So that's what you're able to achieve. So you can still have standard account role based in a much more granular way. But DJ, it's been fantastic talking with you. It's really given me a lot of insights and understanding. And I agree that, with the purple teaming, I think that's for organizations, I think, really where it really thinks about not just about penetration testing and red teaming, but also about, getting the defense, making sure you take steps to actually put the right controls in place to really mitigate and to help organizations get progress to maturity to make it more difficult for attackers to be successful. So it's been fantastic having you on the show. Is there any final thoughts you would like to share with the audience? So I think definitely multi-factor authentication. We're giving some free consulting here on the podcast these days. Is that what we're doing?
MFA and no, it's been great having this conversation. I just let people know no one's safe. I don't say that as a scare tactic, but a lot of companies just think that they're not sexy enough to get hit. And there's just so many things that can be done from not a huge budget, a huge cost standpoint that can just exponentially increase. What we oftentimes tell clients is they're low-hanging fruit, right? Our goal right now in this defensive nature of what we're trying to mature clients to is just pull your fruit higher than your peers. And the passerby attacker is going to look at you and say, why would I spend 2 hours trying to get into your network when I can spend 10 minutes on the 10 beside you? So I think that's the biggest thing is even if you don't have a big budget, do something to make yourself a little bit more secure to give that attacker a brief hesitation on how long it's going to take them to look at you.
The bike lock approach, right?
Yeah. Well,
which bike is going to get stolen?
I've used the same. So back when I lived in Belfast, and you went to park your car, you'd always park your car next to a nicer car that had less security because you knew the attackers, you knew the thieves were going to go after that one first. And that was my methodology. Always make sure that when you were choosing your parking, you chose it wisely.
I always park next to the Honda Accord.
Yeah.
That's
exactly. As we say in Montana, you don't have to outrun the bear, right? So
yeah, exactly. You just need to be faster than your friend.
Right. So, but no, happy to have any conversations that ever come up, and it was a lot of fun.
How can people contact you or get further information? I guess we'll also provide your contact details in the show notes.
Yeah, it's pathfynder.io, Pathfynder with a Y instead of an I. We have an info at. You can reach out directly to me, DJ. It's just DJ@pathfynder.io. Conversations are free. We're happy to have them all day. We're a like-minded group of former folks that served in the government, so we just want our companies in our country to be safe and be doing something, even if it has no economic value to our company.
Yeah, we're all defenders at heart. Right. That's what we want to make sure resiliency and defending. That's what basically we'll even for me it's a passion to make sure that basically we make the internet a safer place. Right. So it was fantastic, DJ, having you on the show. Mike, always great having your intellectual conversation with you all the time. It's fantastic. And hopefully the audience have really found this interesting and really enlightening. And definitely, don't wait. Make sure that if you don't have an incident response plan or you don't have a service provider that's able to provide those, make sure you get out and start looking, because everyone's a target. Everyone at some point is going to become a victim. And it really determines how you can respond and how you can recover and how resilient you are to attacks. It really determines how well your business survives and how quickly you can get back to serving your customers and your employees and everyone else. So make sure that you have something planned, in place, tested, and ready, because that really makes sure that you can be more resiliency to attacks. So it's a pleasure. Stay safe and tune in every 2 weeks for 401 Access Denied, and look forward to future podcasts and talking with you further. So thank you.